Okay. We're going to have some staff come to the table who can help us out. Mr. Kaufman, with your indulgence, can I begin by just asking staff to describe the process that they went through to get to this? And then
my first question.
That was your first question. Okay, terrific. Turn it over.
Hi, good morning. My name is Barbara Gallia, and I'm the senior buyer for the Division of Procurement, and it's my responsibility to look at contracts before they are terminated, to work with my coordinator to determine if this is going to be an extension or a rebid. In this case, for legal services, it was determined to do due diligence to the process that we were going to send out a new RFP. So on February 16th, I sent a review to Robin, to Svi, to Lori Christina, and asked them to review the previous specs, the scope of work, and then we met to determine what changes were going to be made to the scope of work, a schedule of events that were going to take place, vendors that we were going to submit the RFP to. And once all that was determined, and we also developed a committee of 6 people who were going to evaluate and make a recommendation. On May 24th, I mailed the RFP. At that time, I also advertised. It is our responsibility to advertise on email and marketplace, and also on the MCPS procurement event calendar. Email and marketplace is a state website that vendors register based on a commodity code. In this case, it was legal services and attorneys. And anyone who is interested in participating would register there. I uploaded the RFP onto this website, and then immediately any vendors that were interested in the solicitation would automatically be sent via email a copy of the solicitation. I also sent it to the 3 incumbent vendors and then a new law firm that Lori Christina had given me. I held a pre-bid conference on June 11th, and I had 3 attorneys present. Prior to that, I had asked as a deadline for questions to be submitted. So at that time, I gave all the questions out. Everything was posted on email and marketplace, on the event calendar, so everyone got all the same information. The RFP opened on June 22nd. I had 4 responses, passed it out to the evaluation committee. We met 2 weeks later, and it was determined that we were going to pre-qualify the 4 vendors that you now see on the board material.
Mr. Kaufman.
Kate, you described, you said that there were changes from the prior contract. Can you give any information on the changes that were made from the prior contract?
There were insignificant changes, to be honest with you. Some of the attachments and some of the factual information that was updated, but as far as the scope of work, there were very few changes that were made to the RFP and the scope of work. And there were not that many questions from the attorneys.
Could you go into any detail of why you decided to qualify all 4? I mean, I noticed that in the last year, looking at the 4 firms that we've had the contracts with, only 2 of them have gotten any services. So what's the point of qualifying 4 if we haven't really been giving awards to services to 4?
Well, I think as we had looked through, evaluated the proposals based on the criteria that we had, none of them were disqualified based on the criteria. And so there seemed to be no disincentive to pre-qualifying all the firms that actually qualified under the criteria.
So how do we make decisions in terms of which of our firms get particular taskings? They're all, I mean, in the past they've been, it seems like 95% of the work's been going to one firm. So how do we decide which firms get the award, get orders?
Well, over the over the past few years, there have been significant efforts in the Department of Special Education to really do a lot of outreach in terms of supporting schools along the way. So we have very few cases compared to the past that actually require us to have external attorneys involved in due process hearings. Last year, I think there were only 5 cases that went through that actually came to resolution. Of course, there are cases that continue from one school year to the next. So it's a very limited number, and I believe that with that small number of cases that are being involved because of that work we do proactively in working with schools and dispute resolution, working through mediations with families, that we handle all of that internally. But that small number of cases, the schools that have worked with the attorney that is often selected for those cases, he certainly understands the school system, has worked with many of the people, certainly in central office and out there in the schools. I think it really expedites the process for us with, again, that very small number of cases. In the past, there were really significant numbers, and there was a lot more work out there for multiple firms.
So, in the past, till to date, we have over 300,000 in legal services for our special ed counsel. That's 5 or 6 cases.
Again, some of those cases are new, some of those cases are carryovers, but last year there were, I think, a total of 10 cases, 5 that were resolved and settled and, aren't moving on to any other level, that, actually involved the external attorneys, and 5 that are continuing that we're just waiting on decisions for. So maybe a total of 10 cases that we were involved with over the course of the last school year.
And are these cases primarily for private placements?
Often they are about private placements. Again, we do a lot of pre-work with families who request mediation or administrative review. Work closely with the schools in trying to resolve differences before we get to that point where we're involved in a due process hearing. Try to think about the 5 we're involved in now. They are often about other placements, not necessarily non-public, but again, it's very few cases. So I guess non-publics are at issue for some of those, but not all.
And typically, what would a non-public placement cost the system?
Well, a non-public residential placement can cost over $250,000 to $300,000 a year. They're about, this year we're starting, I think, with 17 students in non-public residential, but the day programs range from $50,000 to $100,000 a year.
And could you share, in terms of the contracts that we're proposing to award, what are the rates that the different law firms will be charging us? And how they compare with what we've been paying in the past?
I actually remember for most of them, typically the firms charge by the date of the hearing. So the pre-work that goes in, that's involved in terms of reviewing records, meeting with staff, school-based staff preparing for the hearings, there's not a separate charge, there's not an hourly rate for those. I think at least 2 of the firms were charging about $6,000 based on the date of the hearing. I think one of the firms, if the hearing went on for more than a few days, as sometimes happens in these really complicated cases, then there was a reduction in the rate. I believe one of the firms was hourly, and I think that rate was, I honestly don't remember it. I would say $300, but I think it was actually more than that.
And how do these rates compare with what we've been paying in the past?
I think they're very similar.
Comparable, yeah.
one of the questions we asked in the RFP was about cost-saving measures. So I think that was one of the proposals, again, about if a hearing was going to last more than a few days, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was more than 3 days of hearing, 3 or 4 days of hearing, that the rate would actually get reduced per day.
Now, I'm not sure I understand. You said that the 6,000 or whatever the rate was for like the single incidence of showing up at the hearing. But I mean, if there were cases that didn't end up going to hearing that were resolved sooner, I mean, how does that attorney get reimbursed?
I don't believe they do.
Right.
I think if they do all the pre-work and then we resolve, I don't believe there's a fee paid to them.
I don't remember the details of they had various plans. So some had that you paid nothing for pre-work, but then if it resolved, there was a nominal payment for the pre-work. Some of them were the hourly rate and not pre-work for nothing.
Okay, I mean, I'm still trying to figure. I mean, if we've been paying over $300,000 to a law firm in a year, and it sounds like you've got 5 or 6 cases that have gone to the hearing, and we're talking about $6,000 for the hearing. I mean, explain to me how, where is the $300,000 that we're paying for it? How's that being charged?
So you're talking about under the current contract?
I'm talking about under the current contract.
Okay, so not the RFP.
You're saying
Okay.
it's pretty similar to what you have in the past. So I'm just looking at what we've been paying.
Yeah. I think we'd have to look at, with the initial due process hearing, that's where the hourly rate, the charge per hearing date applies. I'd really have to go back and look at, so if it's a case that moves up to an appellate court or something like that, I have to go back and really look at the contract again to figure out how the charge goes if the case moves forward. The paying for the daily rate of the hearing, I'm positive that is for the cases when they're first going to that first level of hearing. So, and again, a lot of those, at the end of that hearing, when we get the decision, the parent makes the choice, or the school system could make the choice to continue to the next level. But many of those cases do just resolve at that first level.
I mean, would there be any incentives for the contract if the lawyer gets a larger fee if it goes to a hearing? Is there an incentive for the lawyer to basically say, we don't want to resolve these cases, we'd rather have them go to hearing?
That's actually, the lawyer doesn't just make that decision. We have a group called Dispute Resolution Committee. We certainly confer with people in MCPS. It's not the lawyer is making that decision to move the case forward. If the parent, it's the case that the parent moves the case forward, then again, we're having a decision about, do we want to continue to move forward, or is there's always attempts to resolve it again before it moves forward. But the final decision is not just that attorney's decision. It's really a school system decision. Did you have something you wanted to add, Mr. Farris?
Yeah, just in the monthly financial report, we indicate what level they're at, and you can see in the most recent, there are actually 3 of which are appeals to the federal or state court. And so a lot of those costs are involved when we get into those higher level courts.
Mr. Durst?
Yeah, just a couple follow-up questions. You mentioned the Dispute Resolution Committee. Who makes that? Who are the members of that? Or are we looking at them?
It's an august group, Mr. Durso. I sit on Dispute Resolution Committee along with Zvi Greisman, who is an in-house special education attorney, Ms. Gwendolyn Mason, who is the Director of Special Education Services, Julie Hall, who is our Director of Business and Fiscal Information Services, the supervisor of the Equity Assurance and Compliance Unit, Mr. Bartels, who's in charge of our school psychologists, the compliance specialists who work in equity assurance and compliance. Did I forget anybody, Gwen? Felicia Piacente, who's director in the Office of Special Education Services as well. So it's a pretty significant group. The special education cluster supervisors, if we need additional information, they will come, or the program supervisors. It's a pretty, Mr. Patterson, who's in charge of our placement and assessment unit, who deals with the non-public programs. We meet every week, and really, I often say it's honestly one of the best meetings I have every week, because I feel like people who are sitting around that table are taking a very serious look at what's in the best interest of children. And we are able to successfully work with many, many families who end up either withdrawing their mediation requests because we've been able to resolve, or going to the mediation meeting with solutions that make sense for everyone. And, I just think it's a very positive meeting every single week, where people are being as creative as they can and thinking through how can we best meet the needs of the student and best meet the needs of the families. And people, I think, take that work very seriously. It's one of those meetings that people rarely miss, because I think it's a place where we make a definite impact on our families and our students.
Thank you. Just one follow-up. Also, when the 4 different law firms were mentioned, just hypothetically, if it's a new case from a school, and so there has not been any previous experience with a particular law firm that school or case might lend itself to, how would it be determined which of the firms handles the case?
Well, I think ZV makes the decision regarding the case depending on the availability of the legal services, the complexity of the issue, the attorney's experience with that issue, or with the school or the team.
Okay.
Mr. Kim, you have a question on this?
Yeah, 2 questions. So it sounds from your back and forth with Mr. Kaufman as if we're spending an average of about $300,000 a year for someone to handle approximately 10 cases, with 5 of those being resolved generally during the year, if I'm recapping that correctly. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, since we could probably hire a single in-house counsel for much less than $300,000, why are we bidding this out as opposed to going in-house?
So I think on the policy question, that's obviously something that the board's going to have to deal with. I think and I know that the Fiscal Management Committee is actually looking at a recommendation for the full board in terms of that. I think, what's in front of us now is that we do have in-house counsel, but we do hire some outside counsel for some of these cases. What we're being asked to do is to authorize these pre-qualified firms and some appropriation that is available to use. So I think with respect to the question of in-house versus other counsel, that's a larger policy question that will come to us through the Fiscal Management Committee's recommendation.
And I did just want to add, in terms of the length of the hearing dates, again, when you think that we've done a lot of pre-work on our own to try to resolve cases, the cases that move forward, you can imagine, are pretty complicated and quite complex. And, the length of days of the hearing vary from case to case. I mean, I think we all wish they'd, quickly resolve in 1 or 2 hearing dates, but sometimes between, the various folks that we are bringing forward to testify and the private attorneys are bringing forward to testify, the hearings, might take a few days longer, but these are pretty complex, not easily resolved issues.
I think my second question is, so for this approval of these 4 firms as a result of this RFP, what's the time period? Is it a 1-year time frame? Is it indefinite?
It's a 1-year contract term that starts actually August 24th, and it will run for 1 year, and then we have available extensions. Actually, this one was written as the previous one, that it's open-ended as long as there's a mutual agreement with the law firms that are pre-qualified and Montgomery County Public Schools. It can be extended.
Mr. Kaufman?
anything, Chris?
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Different
didn't see
issue.
it.
I'm a different issue.
Okay.
Okay, just want to make a statement. As my colleagues on the board know, the Fiscal Management Committee is currently reviewing various models for how legal services are provided by school systems. It's likely that we'll be making a recommendation to the full board to change our current model, and in the future, if the board agrees, general counsel services will be provided by in-house counsel rather than by outside counsel. When that occurs, I anticipate there will be further discussions as to whether legal services for specialty areas such as special education should also be provided primarily in-house and by outside counsel on a more limited basis. My personal view is that it would be a better model, but that is a matter for future discussion and analysis. I will therefore vote to support the proposed contracts for the special ed legal services that are before us today. I do that because they are only for 1 year, and any option to renew should first be approved by the board. I recommend that if the superintendent seeks to renew that option, that staff come first to the Fiscal Management Committee to share the process that will be used to decide if the renewal clause should be invoked, including factors to be considered, as well as BOE input. These factors should include a comprehensive review of the performance of our legal services contractors.
Okay, are we ready to, is there any other questions on item 3.1.1?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Buckley.
Right. There's item 4336.1, which is the Gallup contract. I figure since we're allocating $900,000 to someone, it would be just helpful to remind the public what we're looking to spend that money on.
It is actually an allocation for 3 years, so it's actually $300,000 a year, but we're doing it all at once for transparency. It's an online survey for employees with the results and reporting being made available to managers, leaders based on the scope of work.
Right, and this is an item that has been brought to the board previously. I just wanted to, I think it's a significant amount of money, and I think it's important for us to just understand, excuse me, that is what it was for.
You'll recall that we discussed this during the budget process last year, and actually our presentation on the PELP discussion will attend to some of the issues regarding our intents to use the data that we gather, the perceptual data that we gather through the survey for school improvement purposes.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Can I get a motion on 3.1.1?
So moved.
Is there a second? Yes, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor of accepting 3.1.1, please indicate as unanimous among those present. Thank you for your time. And that brings us then to item 4.0, the Office of Human Resources and Development, monthly report and appointment. Can I get a motion on the green sheet?
So moved.
Okay.
So whereas the Let me start over. Whereas the educators and others who are employed by Montgomery County Public Schools are key partners in the important work and achievements of the school system, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education approves the monthly Human Resources and Development Report with its listings identifying new employees, employee resignations, and other employee status updates, and be it further resolved that the members of the Board of Education and the Superintendent of Schools express their condolences to the family of the deceased employee, and be it further resolved that this resolution be made a part of the minutes of this meeting.
So we've had a motion, a second. All those in favor? Human Resources reports unanimous among those present.
Before we do this one appointment, there is one, unfortunately, there's one death resolution. Whereas the death on August 2nd, 2012 of Mr. Mark Harding, security assistant at Quince Orchard High School, has deeply saddened the staff, students, and members of the Board of Education. And whereas during the 13.11 years with Montgomery County Public Schools, when called on to assist any staff member, Mr. Harding always placed the students first in his decision-making. And whereas Mr. Harding was a team member and an effective resource for not only the security team, but the school administration as well, now therefore be it resolved that the members of the Board of Education, the Superintendent of Schools, express their sorrow at the death of Mr. Mark Harding, and extend deepest sympathy to his family, and be it further resolved that this resolution be made a part of the minutes of this meeting and a copy be forwarded to Mr. Harding's family.
Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous among those present.
And we have one appointment, Mrs. Sharon Gooding, Supervisor for the Equity Assurance and Compliance Unit in the Office of Special Education and Student Services. Ms. Gooding could not be with us today. Prior to coming to MCPS in 2005, Mrs. Gooding worked in the private sector as an attorney in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. For the last 7 years, she served as an assistant attorney in the Legal Services Unit, Office of Special Education and Student Services. In her role as supervisor, she looks forward to providing excellent services to all MCPS constituents.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor? And it's unanimous. We extend our congratulations.
Thank you, Maria.
That brings us to item 5.0, the 2012-2016 subdivision staging policy.
I'll wait for Mr. Crispell to get ready there. I will make some opening remarks and then turn it over to Mr. Crispell, and then of course we'll have any conversation if needed. So every year, Montgomery County Public School staff provides projected school enrollment and facility utilization data to the Montgomery County Planning Board. The data are used to determine school clusters that have high utilization levels where subdivision approvals need to be restricted to avoid compounding projected capacity deficits. The methodology for this annual assessment, or school test, is included in the County 2012-2016 subdivision staging policy /school test. While the school test is conducted annually, the policy is reviewed on a 4-year cycle, and the policy is being reviewed this year. The 2012-2016 subdivision staging policy is a set of policy tools